Good evening. I'm Stevenson Manners, your host of Your Voice with the NRP, and we're here again, Monday, April 25th. Of course, we were not here last week because it was a public holiday, Easter Monday, and the candidates were scattered across the island, involved in activities. There was a big fishing tournament on that day at the Newcastle beach. So it is so good to be back, our favorite spot on a Monday night with the Nevis Reformation Party. Now, since we were last here, Premier Mark Brantley addressed the nation. Not just Nevis, not just St. Kitts and Nevis, but the entire world. It is an address which was instructive in many ways. Of course, we know over his 15-year career, political career, he has delivered many speeches, some known for their eloquence, some, of course, laced with vitriol, such as that at the Keon Convention of the People's Action Movement. His latest speech was instructive because of its truthfulness. He told the world, unabashedly, unashamedly, unreservedly, we have lost our way. We've been saying that from these microphones for a couple of months. It was pleasing to hear it from the horse's mouth. We'll be looking at the state of affairs in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We'll be looking at the period of mourning as designated by the Governor General in honor of the late Premier Van Samry. And while there are all the political shenanigans going on, the cost of living is hitting the roof. Gasoline, bread, electricity. We're here to talk about all those issues and more. And with us, someone who's forever clinical, Dr. Patricia Bartlett. You'll hear from her after this break.
Your voice, your voice, your voice with the NRP. This and every Monday, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Join host Stevenson Manners and the NRP candidates as they amplify your voice.
We're back. This is all about you. The people whose lives are impacted by the policies of government. You're the ones who really care, not them. And so we have a lot to talk about tonight. Dr. Bartlett, we've been absent for a week. I know you have been engaged in your community over the Easter weekend. And of course, as always, you want to bring greetings to the people of Nevis and by extension, the Federation, and of course the diaspora.
Thanks, Steve. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I would like, first off, I would like to just send condolences to the people who are mourning, particularly the family and close friends of the late His Excellency Vance Amry. That I think really shocked most of us, his passing. So we're in a period of mourning now, as I said. But before I go on to make any comments on that, I would just like to also extend condolences to the family of my late teacher, Charles Busu. He's from the Gingerland area as well. And when I was in Prospect School, in primary school, he was my favorite teacher. And so tonight I'm really, saddened by his passing. And I really would like to, again, send sympathies to everyone concerned. As it relates to the passing, though, of the late Sir...
Not sir yet.
Not sir yet. No, he's not sir yet, isn't he? He's not yet. He's Right Excellency. Vance Winkworth Amry. It saddens me, because irrespective of which side of the aisle you're on, he was a decent human being to most of us, Of course, you'll have the odd people who would have issues, and who's going to go through life without having issues, And so it really is painful to watch what has been happening. The Governor General, in his wisdom, has decided that we would have a period of mourning for at least 10 days. Of course, you can't please everyone, but usually the period of mourning extends from, at least for a lot of us, we don't really get over it, because my mom has gone now over a year and it still almost seems like it's a period of mourning for me. And so I didn't think that it was not a reasonable time, considering the circumstances. He was not here, and then he had to come back, and then he had laid in state in St. Kitts, and then had to come over. So from the period of time that he got here until he's buried, I thought that would have been, for me, that was a reasonable time. Of course, I've seen people saying, oh, precedents had been set before because you had some individual in the past of similar stature who would have just had one day of mourning. So what? When we look at what has happened, I still don't think it is unreasonable for the 10 days. What the Gigi was asking for, he never said to us, close down your businesses, pull out your ashcloth and ashes, and don't do anything for 10 days. That wasn't it. All he was asking for is a solemn period of just 10 days for us just to at least pay our respects. And so I was so disappointed, Steve, when I realized that in St. Kitts, the agriculture open day, and we normally have this a big thing for us around here. In Nevis, it's a little bigger than in St. Kitts, but still it's a big thing for them. That is their premier activity for the agriculture department in St. Kitts as well. And so they were minded to postpone that event, which was, I think, scheduled for the 22nd of this month.
Today, actually. It was supposed to be today, I
okay.
think. Yeah.
So they postponed theirs. And so I expected that in kind, he's Nevisian. And on Kittitian soil, people over there saw fit to postpone the event, in respect of the period of mourning. But over here, we are going to be having interprimary. I have nothing against interprimary. I know the kids, we all love it. We all look forward to it. We have been, shut out from that for a couple of years now, because of COVID, and we're all excited to get back. But what I can't understand is why couldn't we defer it for a little later time, just because of the period of mourning. And I'm particularly disappointed in the NIA, just because Vance Amry served the people of Nevis. He had a choice. He could have gone elsewhere, but he made a life decision that he was going to serve the people of Nevis, and he did so. I'm not saying he was a perfect man. I'm not here to eulogize him. All I'm saying is that I think that he deserved at least that level of respect. And coming from an NIA, which he was a part of, that is what I found most troubling. So when the Premier would have said that they've lost their way, in more ways than one, it didn't just have to do with their behavior in St. Kitts. It seems as if it's something that is festering in the entire, atmosphere and environment that they have created, in that they seem not to be putting people first. And so, like I said, I've registered my my disappointment. I know I would be taken to task for it, but I'm strong enough to withstand those kind of things, because I would go to my grave thinking the same thing, that they could have done better. They could have done better by the man who would have been one of the founders for the same CCM that they're now clamoring, to be a part of. So I don't think that they have shown any sensitivity whatsoever, because for us to get embroiled as well, because on the first day that he was lying in state in St. Kitts at the government headquarters, that is the day that was earmarked as the resolve or dissolve day. That could have been deferred as well. He talked about quiet diplomacy. You don't have to be making big noise about everything. This clang, just all this noise is not necessary. And in a period like this, why couldn't you have deferred it? It's been 7 years that you lived with the conditions that you're under. And I don't think that 10 days would have made a significant difference, in the political landscape around here. But be that as it may, I just want to let people know that I think that we should continue and I would encourage people to continue to respect the period of mourning. Don't watch those people at the top who seem not to be able to constrain themselves. Divisions, we are better than that. We're better than that. I just don't feel comfortable with the optics in that, NRP had an event scheduled for the same day that Mr. Ami passed. And we decided, out of respect, we were not going to have it. NRP, mind you, is on the opposite side and has always been, Not only that, but the same event that we had postponed, we didn't know that the period of mourning would have fallen on the same day that we would have had as an alternative date to the day that we would have, So we had to postpone a second time. But it didn't cost us any grief, to do that. So we have done that a second time around. Because the thing is, I made it clear from the time I heard that Mr. Ami passed, I made it clear that personally, I was not going to be one to be participating, particularly when the period of mourning was announced. I said, look, Patricia Bartlett would not be participating, not when it falls within the period of time that has been designated as the period of mourning. And so I think they understood my position. I was not telling anybody that you shouldn't do or you should do, because it's a period of time in which people are expected to use their discretion. No one said that you should shut down your business, but if you feel like you want to do that to honor the man and respect him, then you can do so. That is not anything that is being imposed on you. It's a discretionary period. So don't watch other people. So if somebody else is doing something in Antigua, you don't have to decide that you'll do it too, because they had one day of mourning elsewhere. Because, I heard people talking about this precedent has been set. Last year on the same time, I think from the 9th to the 18th in the UK, the Prince Philip, when he passed, and from the time he died to the time he was buried until the next day was observed as a period of mourning. So I really, I keep, repeating myself, don't think it's an unreasonable period of time. And so I just want to encourage us all to continue to be respectful and to be sensitive, because the optics don't look so good.
Let me join you. I extended my condolences the Monday after the Saturday he passed while on this program. But let me extend my condolences to Mrs. Vernie Amry, she is now in Ireland, and of course Meredith, who arrived back from the UK on the weekend, and of course the other family members who will be coming in, and by extension the extended family of Nivisions and Kititians, because he indeed served on both islands. Of course, it is the longest period of mourning in our history. If I can recall, Robert Bratcher, the period of mourning was 1 week. But I think the timing on this one was dictated by the circumstances. Unfortunately, he passed away in the United Kingdom. His body was brought home on Wednesday last. And of course, the minute his mortal remains comes back to the Federation, you have to start the period of mourning. And of course, the state funeral is on Saturday the 30th. I'm sure it has been set for specific reasons, maybe to facilitate people traveling from overseas, etc., etc. And I'm sure there are going to be heads of states here. So I can understand why the 10-day period of mourning. It is a big talking point all across the island that the people who should be respecting that period of mourning are not doing so. The Premier is, of course, the man who received the mantle from him on October 29th, 2017, and I can hear the speech ringing in my ear. He said that Moses is passing the mantle, the baton, to... Who did he pass it to? The name eludes me at the moment. But Moses to Joshua. He was passing it to Joshua. And he has been the beneficiary. He has said since the passing that he was never interested in politics. That Premier Amry and his wife came to his home, and the Premier had him in one corner, and his wife had his wife in the other corner, convincing him to join the ranks. And to see how this has played out, that the NIA, who should be leading the way, is showing the least respect to the departed leader, is heartrending. I laughed my head off this morning when I saw a notice from Nevis Television saying that the press conference for Thursday the 28th had been postponed in respect of the passing of Premier Amway. Nevis Television put the announcement out the day after, the 21st of April, the day after the Premier's body arrived. And as you said so rightly, if in St. Kitts, the big agricultural exhibition, the Minister of Agriculture is Alexis Jeffers, also a member of the Nevis Island administration, if they can postpone the agricultural exhibition, why couldn't inter-primary be deferred for a week? And to add insult to injury, he put the dear lady, the Deputy Governor General, to declare a public half holiday to add to the fun and frolic. And as you said, we all want the sport. We want the children to use their athletic energies, but of course that I find to be very disrespectful. As regards putting off the press conference, let it be known that the reason why that is cancelled has nothing to do with Premier Amway. It has everything to do of his fear of facing the media, because he has no good story to tell at the moment. That is it. When he set the date for the 28th, he figured that his ploy to unseat the Prime Minister would have worked, and that he would be smiling all the way. But things have turned around a little bit. As it turned out, they haven't even waited for the Governor General to rule. I heard today that they have moved for a motion of no confidence to bring their own house down. What sort of events we are having in the Federation?
It's rather interesting, Steve, as you brought up the motion of no confidence that was filed today from what we're hearing, from the reports that we're getting. Prior to this, last week was really a week with a difference. I don't know how else to categorize last week, because all the pundits took to the airwaves, and the difficulty that we're having, I think, is that the sheriff and the deputy, they spend too much time on social media. So they have to appease the people on social media who I don't sometimes understand what their motive is. But you can't please everybody, and I think it's time for them to turn off that source, because they have been getting bad advice, you know. But the thing is a drumbeat, people keep pounding the same thing over and over, and so that's what they have been reacting to. They're very reactionary. So I was preparing for tonight, and before I heard that they filed the motion, because you remember that last week they sent a love letter to the Gigi. It just, I don't understand the basis, for writing those kind of letters, because they should have sought legal advice.
They said they did.
That is advice that has been floating on the internet because of in social media, by people who want to force an amendment to the Constitution that does not exist. Because we've had since 1983, not even, and the Premier himself has said it, we have not even changed a syllable in the Constitution.
He said it last week.
We have not changed anything. And so they had ample time to be able to absorb what is in the Constitution. By now, they shouldn't even have to reference it by pulling it out. A physical, they should have most of it embedded in, in the psyche by now, because I don't think it was that difficult to interpret, because there are specific sections in there, and I went and I researched more, and I was like, these people, is either they need an English teacher, or maybe some people you shouldn't let into law school, because comprehension is key. I can't understand for the life of me how they could have read what all of us have been reading and would have seen a loophole. I spoke to a person who was someone who called me claimed to be a lawyer, and I was like, oh well, but I think some people are just, past experience.
Yeah.
And so I want to invite our people, though, to become conversant with what is in our Constitution. We don't, I think, know enough about what is in our Constitution. And someone on social media, I think, was advocating for us to start this kind of discussion or this kind of exposure in schools. And it is not a bad idea. I think it's a very good idea. And bring back civics and all the rest of it. Because we don't, as a people, read enough. So we are not as well informed as we should be. And I think that is why some people seem to have thought that there was a chance. So I went and I read, and I read it just like any other person who had English. So I want to encourage our people to go to the Constitution. Look at section 52, subsection 6, which speaks to how the Governor General could remove the PM. And it involves the use of the tool that they have now, which is the motion of no confidence. That prior to their getting in government was a big issue, and that was what was all the talk about, and probably the only thing of merit that would have changed when they promised that they would be constitutional, at least something done in that regard. And they brought to the House the motion of no confidence, which we now know you have at least 21 days, because prior to now, there was some ambiguity, and so the loophole that existed, the previous government did not bring it. And then we went all the way to the Privy Council and all the drama associated with that, and people clapping themselves on the back and all that. But you see, the thing is smartness, smartness. And so now we know that it wasn't going to fly, and they eventually, I don't know if they withdrew the letter from the GG, because it just seems so foolish, Well,
WinFM said this evening that the Deputy Prime Minister said no comment. So they're doing things, but they're not telling the people. I think they're in a confused state. And that is why the Premier has also cancelled this press conference, because he don't want to say anything either.
Well, it's about time they shut up, because they were advised that it should be done through quiet diplomacy. And they didn't listen. And from the grave, I'm sure they're hearing it. Quiet diplomacy.
Well, I want you to hold there for a minute, because I thought that the editorial of the St. Kitts Nevis Observer on the weekend was very instructive. I have it here. A voice of reason has departed when most needed. Now I'll read a segment of it for you. The return to the Federation of former Premier Vance Amries Remain on Wednesday was not only a deepening movement and solemn occasion, but one that elicited serious reflection and introspection, particularly among the nation's leaders who gathered at the airport for the military reception. They were all aware that within the casket was a statesman extraordinaire, and more pertinently, a voice of reason. That voice of reason has departed at a time when the Federation needs it most. The core of the Unity Administration is being shaken like never before. It is no longer a secret that the senior functionaries are not seeing eye to eye. In fact, a disdainful ultimatum has been issued to the team's leader by his immediate deputies, and that cannot just be given a cursory glance. The demands in the proposition are calling for the leader to relinquish his portfolios in short order. It is jarring. The coalition partners are demanding that the Prime Minister hand over the Ministries of Finance and Sustainable Development and step down as Prime Minister within a year. It was a cruel coincidence, or maybe intentional, that Wednesday, April 20th, the day that Mr. Amries' body arrived, was given as a deadline for a response to those serious demands. Escalating the unity war on that day, and knowing that a period of official mourning was inevitable, is an ominous portent that civility may not be among the elements prevailing in any discussions. It can best be described as unconscionable. And I'll go to the final paragraph. Mr. Amri would have continued to preach unity and respectful conciliation. It would be interesting to see what will transpire in the days following his internment. Well, he hasn't even been interred. It's not until Saturday. And events are already unfolding. The week and the period of mourning has been tarnished by his own mates. One thing is for sure. In the upcoming elections, whether it's federal or local, he can't be that bold to tell Nivisions, do this one for Vance.
Yeah, that would be sacrilegious. He couldn't very well, have the audacity to say this one for Vance, because he has been warned, and they've not, at least in public, conducted themselves, worthy of, being able to benefit from the legacy that Vance Army would have left. I don't think that they could try that, and I don't think that they should try that, because it would infuriate a lot of us, because they're not worthy. But the article, I think, reflects greatly what a lot of people have been saying. If these guys just could not wait, imagine on the first day of lying in state, that activity or that solemn moment was eclipsed by people waiting, because you could hardly, people as if they were not even paying attention that His Excellency was lying in state. People were like, especially on social media, everybody was speculating as to what was going to become of the day. People couldn't wait for it, and so that was a buzz, and it's as if nothing else was going on, and it was unconscionable, just to reiterate what the Observer editorial would have said. Unfortunate that we're at this stage.
We'll give you a moment to gather your composure. We'll take our first break.
But the economy is broken, the government stick. Can the opposition come and take a seat? The debt is high and employment low, and it's the poor people taking the blow. I say we tired, we need a revolution. We just can't depend on vaccination. I say we tired, time to pick we self off the floor. Just remember, people matter more. So when you hear them talking bull on the radio, people used to matter more. Whether you red, blue, orange or yellow, people used to matter more. But when they needed us for last election, we were always their first option. But now they in and they comfortable. People don't matter no more. Whoa, some people may not like this, but people used to matter more. RCC and them made a slogan out of it. People used to matter more.
And we're back, and we're discussing issues which impact all our lives. It's going to be a very important week in the life of the island of Nevis and the country of St. Kitts Nevis. Whither St. Kitts Nevis? Whither Nevis? Now, Pat, how did we get here? We know that on December 17, 2014, we were sold an idea, even now being described by the leader of Nevis as the best idea in our independent history, where three persons and three parties were brought together, and for the first 5 years they told us it was the best thing since sliced bread. Of course, June 2020, we know that the Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the People's Action Movement cut a very lonely figure. He was the only one who made it to Government House to sign in Prime Minister Timothy Harris for a second time. Several of the operatives were absent. And then, of course, the saber rattling started in the year of our Lord 2022 as a local election loomed. The Premier and the CCM had nothing to show. a virtual empty scorecard. And he decided to introduce this element into the body politics, which has been done before, to blame everything on St. Kitts and everything on one man. I find it very difficult to comprehend how three parties in a collision, two of them very friendly, very cordial, have 7 of 9. And yet is trying to tell the country of St. Kitts Nevis, with 98% literacy, that everything falls at the feet of the Prime Minister. How did we get here? These are issues impacting your lives. Be free to call us, 469-1616, 469-1700. Pat, have you been able to fathom this?
Steve, I when you asked the question, I said, Steve must have been looking on my
No, I'm several feet away.
I
Social distancing.
I wrote the question. I actually wrote the question out. How did we get to this point?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Because all along, like you said, things seem to be going along, best thing since sliced bread, and it was being stated. Then, of course, it was an issue of trust since 2020.
No, before that.
Well,
the trust issue came in on May 20th, 2018, the Verdi scandal. And of course, when the Prime Minister said, none of you can hold a candle of correction to me. That, to me, is one of the most indictable statements made in the history of St. Kitts and Nevis politics. Three years into a coalition, and that was said. I think the other members on the other side of the fence was stung by that statement, absolutely.
But, well, I guess people interpret things differently. For me, it was, all of it cop alike. For me, it wasn't necessary that we don't trust one another. But then again, maybe is there any trust among, people who have, similar deficiencies? Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to go there. But for me, the demonstration of the lack of trust seemed to have started in 2020. Like I said, I did not interpret the 2018 incident the same way that you did. Everybody's the same for us, all is concerned. So maybe they should not have been trusting each other. So maybe you're right. But in any event, in 2020, after the elections, when just one person supported the Prime Minister, there's where the trust would have, for me. Because what we were hearing is that there were manipulations behind the scenes, and secret conversations and things like that going on between all parties, it seems, at that point, except for NRP, because NRP would have been the only ones who didn't have. But it seems like CCM was willing to go with Labour if things had turned Labour's way. Those kind of things. So after that set the scene, I think, for what we're seeing today. But I just thought that maybe common sense would have prevailed and people wouldn't pull out their sword and fall on their own swords. Because I made a comment that I think that this is a kamikaze type of, relationship that these people have right now, or, because I can't understand how they're going to puncture their own boat, so to speak. You all in the same rubber dinghy and you're going to puncture it. I mean,
you make the analogy about boat. I think I made another analogy, I think when J.D. Keynes was here last, that it reminded me of days playing cricket on the village green. And there were always some stubborn boys. And bear in mind that there were 30, 40 people on that square and everybody wanting a bat. And some guys, when they didn't get a bat, decided they want to pull up the stumps, throw the stumps, break up the bat, and put the ball in the pocket and run home. I have never seen this in the history of St. Kitts and Nevis. And there's a lot of talk going around. I've been hearing through the grapevine that they wanted the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party to help them to bring the house down. They were hoping the motion with no confidence would come from the opposition side.
Because ordinarily that is where it would arise, in the ordinary play. People don't follow the own government and bring a motion of no confidence. And usually it's a motion of confidence that the government side brings, and the opposition would be a motion of no confidence. But it seems like things have been reversed here. But in any event, they just wanted somebody to bail them out just for the optics, to say, well, the opposition would have brought it, and because they don't want to bear responsibility for anything. At the end, they would say, well, the opposition brought it, and But in any event, we are where we are because there was no trust. We are where we are because people have been self-serving. It has not been about the people. It has been about power.
Hold it there, Doc.
And money.
We've got our first caller for the evening. Good evening, caller. Welcome.
Mr. Manners, good night.
Hi, good evening, Mansrat.
Yes. Dr. Bartley, good night.
Good night.
And good night to all the listeners. Mr. Manners, we're between two programs tonight, so I'm not going to be too long.
Between two programs? How can you do that?
Yeah, well, remember, when we practiced before you, so.
Oh, okay.
But listen here.
Yes.
On the Mark Wednesday, Mark said, you don't know what the 10 days morning all about. You know me hear that?
I didn't hear him because I didn't listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said, you don't know what the 10 days morning all about. He said, bigger people than do less days.
Wow.
He said that the Wednesday night gone, so
Wow.
you say, I'm not listening. You see, it's good for listening. We tell people, even that, listening, and you get more grounds. Anyway,
True.
we want to big up JD and Ron. For the past 2 Thursday, they make on fire. And JD said something, and they go repeat it. We tell the people of Nevis, the things that are going, they saying, yes, it's important, and it's good to listen, but not let that distraction be distract from what take place, not the island, the broken promises and so. And that they need to synchronize. You catch me?
Yes.
We check this as one derail, eh?
You said about derail?
And derail.
They're going off the tracks.
Yeah, man. Them derail the train. And, check them out. Remember, the next thing supposed to come up our island administration election, right?
Yes.
Why you want to come on federal in front of that for?
Well, it's clear to us, and it's been clear for several weeks now, that it's put there to confuse the people of Nevis, because in the past, Nevisians have reacted to think it's does this and think it's does that it's somebody else's fault and not our own.
Yeah.
And so that's the ploy.
But the truth about it, that I run for the island, and not really for the federal. But me have to put in this here. Dr. Timothy Harris, we not care what nobody say, you're a genius. You're a genius.
Why do you say that?
But, back to JD, still, although at the federation, but no let that the district, I can remember at the island I run for, synchronize the broken promises. Alright?
Thank you. Your advice is forever sound.
Okay then.
Okay, have a great evening.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Pat, I'm sure you're not distracted.
No, but these are issues that impact our lives, so we can't divorce ourselves from, participating in this kind of, dialogue. It's important for people to know, where you stand on issues. So I think that I would excuse myself tonight for not focusing on exclusively, what is going on in Nevis, because what happens, we're going to have to participate in this election as well, So we were talking about what brought us to this point, and I would have made the point that I think that really these guys were self-serving and were pursuing their interests above our interests. When the noises started, we heard about fair share for Nevis, but it didn't make sense in the context in which it was being presented, because when we look at the fact that we were just coming out of the budget cycle, we just transitioned from 2021 to 2022 budget. It means that we have gone through a process. The Premier knew what was allocated to Nevis, and there was no noise for fair share, at least not at this level. At that point in time, he said yay when they got to the budget in St. Kitts. The same allocation that was made at the federal level as budgetary support for Nevis appeared in the Nevis Island Administration's budget. It means that you accepted that you were going to get whatever number, 45 million or whatever it is, and you were satisfied enough with that you were planning your programs and your projects based on that allocation. So it was a bit strange for most of us. We just couldn't make the nexus. When you would come out in February, March, start demanding fair share.
Because the heat you're putting on him.
Well, it's not just the heat, but I think it is the fact that he has not produced anything. Bath Village, by now, they would have been promised a road. Our elections are fast approaching, and the road is not being delivered. When you go over there, they have the obsession with the walls. 2 walls have started, completed on one, person's property, which is supposed, I guess is a supporter. And then next to that, another one would have started. Nothing much going on there, But apparently the money was supposed to be disbursed. I guess he wanted an advance on it, or whatever the request is. I don't know the intricacy or the details related to the demand that was made of the Prime Minister when all this came to a head. But the thing is, the Prime Minister is a smart guy. He knows that these guys don't trust him. He knows that he doesn't trust them. So I don't think that he was minded to put himself at risk in terms of doing manipulations that were not within the confines of what the law allowed. Because I invite people again to look at the Constitution and look at Chapter 6 as it relates to finance. You have Section 69, which speaks to the consolidated fund. Section 70, which speaks to the withdrawal from the same fund. 71, Section 71, that speaks to authorization for expenditure from the consolidated fund. And 72, authorization of expenditure in advance of the appropriation, because you have to do that process. And remember, we made the point last time that it seems as if the Premier is not quite well versed in how government works. And I think that has been demonstrated in the letters that were flowing back and forth and the responses of the Prime Minister to the said letter, just to suggest or just to dismiss it rather. And you could just encapsulate it in one sentence. You guys know nothing about government. You could have just made that statement. You guys know nothing about government, because they have not learnt about the processes and the procedures, and they have not read the Constitution. So I imagine that what he was asked to do would have been outside of the bounds of what these laws would allow him to do. Because when you're going to do, if you're going to go and allocate monies that were not in the appropriation, then you're going to have to be doing warrants, for unforeseen, expenditure, which Section 73 would have spoken to. So I imagine that he would not have exposed himself on their behalf, because he knows, who he's dealing with. And plus, the IMF was not very kind. The IMF would have pointed out, and people are now gravitating to those kind of international and independent assessment as to what is going on in our financial sphere here. Because I think the point was made in the IMF report that there were some statistical discrepancies, they call them. Some people call them other things. But we had, and pointed out by the IMF, that we had statistical discrepancies between monies that couldn't be accounted for. That is basically what it was. To the tune of $89.9 million in 2017. 2017 was an election year. Likewise, $61.5 million of statistical discrepancies, mind you, is a negative sign in front of that, meaning they can't find it, they can't account for it. And that was in the year 2020, which again was an election year. So my summation for the whole thing is that that is where this request was intended to go. And I don't think he would have exposed himself any further to facilitate them when he knew that he didn't have their support, and he couldn't trust them and they were not trusting him. And so the public tantrum started, you know, when he didn't accede to that. And then of course you had the little sideshow with the deputy. So the sheriff come up with the money story and the deputy come up with the power story.
A trade-off. A bit of a trade-off.
Right. And we would have spoken about that before, you know, about the deal that they apparently came up between them. But it was an ill-thought-out thing, you know. They didn't take it to this logical conclusion. What is going to happen? They didn't do contingency planning and all that. And that's why it appears as if now that they are going to be falling on their own sword. They pull the sword out, but they're going to be falling on their own sword.
You know, something crossed my mind today. And time is a great leveler. Former leader of the NRP, Joseph Parry, instituted a policy where the cabinet of the Nevis Island Assembly would meet time to time with the cabinet of the federal government. They opened their books, they had frank discussions. I remember the term was coined that they're going across the shark-infested water. The CCM option was, give me R3 for we, send us to St. Kitts. Now, of course, Mr. Brantley has been part of the coalition since 2015, but he brought along two new mates, Honorable Eric Evelyn and the Honorable Alexis Jeffers. They haven't completed 2 years as yet. They're about 22 months in. Are they saying that these guys are not giving him help? That they have been useless at the federal level? That they get 2 salaries and deliver nothing? And I've said to you before, I guarantee you that if Carlisle, Pemberton, King, Bingy had been assigned a job to bring the money back, it would have landed in Charlestown already. It is a failure of government.
It is. It is obvious. And to ask people to put all of their trust in you, because only you alone can deliver. You know? You alone, you would have been the architect for the Charleston Accord. So where does that leave us, Steve? Think about it. If we go into an election now and Team Unity loses, where does that leave Nevis as it relates to its fair share? The agitation for the fair share is going to be on the basis of what?
Because after 7 years it has not been codified. Right.
And there was no attempt to do so. Even though the people on the other side, on NRP side, would have been agitating for that, would have been recommending that, would have been cussing about that, said, boy, do this, do that. You know, nothing. So was it about the people of Nevis? We're not hearing from the other 2 members. Are they on mute?
Well, I heard one's off island. If people are not resigning but withdrawing their services, it begs the question: did he leave the island before this was made public? But I heard that Minister for Gingerland is off island. The other one, of course, is very mute because he's contemplating what could happen if indeed he is not returned.
Yeah, and so that is the dilemma I think that Nevis is going to find itself in, you know. And so what are they going to say? Well, nobody else could deliver it for you, since I was the architect of the Charleston Accord. Okay, the signatories to it, you know, it seems as if, okay, one is gone, one is deceased, and the other 2 seem as if they just might lose the position that they now hold, and so we already said that there was very little weight associated with the motion of the Charleston Accord in any event, and this makes it obsolete. I mean, I don't see how we could use this as a bargaining chip for who to force who into action on behalf of Nevis. We have had 3, and in a position at one point when we had 2, we had more, I think, leverage. We had more leverage when we had 2. We didn't use it then. We got 3, we had no leverage. So what are they going to do? Increase the number of seats in Nevis by 4 just so that they could
double up some more.
Give us another one? Because 3 have not been effective. They have not represented the interests of the people of Nevis. So I don't even understand how they could come back in good conscience. If I were there, I would just at least resign. But I understand that there was some resignation associated with today's activities, but I don't know.
You've heard that?
That is what I was hearing, through the grapevine. But I don't know if there's any truth to it. But maybe that would be the best thing for them to do.
Yeah, the story broke late, and of course the media houses tried to get something out. But I'm sure by tomorrow we'll get a clearer picture of how things are unfolding. Is the Premier here?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know?
I wouldn't know.
Sources are saying he went off to New York over the weekend. I don't know. I can't confirm that.
Okay.
But
he should be back at least in time for the burial.
Yes, I heard he'll be back by Wednesday.
Wherever he is, yeah. But you see, the thing is, though, all this is going on at a time when the visions are crying out about the cost of living.
We'll get to that. Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll further the discussion we're having, and of course we'll deal with the cost of living on Nevis. Let's take a break.
I say we tired, now take it the momentum. Oh, Mr. Premier, where we get the energy from. I say we tired, time to protect the poor. Just remember, people matter more.
And we're back. I know you're anxious to get into the cost of living and inflation because it's affecting all of us. But the conventional wisdom was that we lay late Premier Amri to rest on Saturday. Sunday, of course, is not a working day. Then Monday is Labor Day. And so we figured that we might hear from the Governor General on Tuesday or Wednesday. Why do you think they took a preemptive strike? And obviously, I don't know if the Governor General would have communicated to them that they were on a wild goose chase, but it was alarming to hear what happened today. Why? Why do you think that is?
I really don't. I can't follow these guys anymore, to be honest with you. They've been making some irrational moves. First you write to the Governor General, then you don't wait for him to respond. When you should have filed the MONC before, one would think. That would have been, if you're playing for time, because for some reason there seemed to be a rush. There seemed to be a rush to conclude this thing. I mean, you've tolerated each other for 7 years, and you tell me that you can't just, So I don't want to hazard a guess, to be quite honest with you, because I don't want to look stupid. Because I can't follow these guys anymore. What they're doing is just not logical. So...
Well, I have a kind of theory. If they had waited until next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, and the Prime Minister was aware of what was going to happen, he might have decided within the time allotted to him to announce an election, in which case he would have won in about 21 days. This gives us 90-day. But we've got a caller. Good evening, caller. Welcome to Your Voice with the NRP.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
How are you doing?
Could you lift your voice a bit? You're very low.
Good evening. How are you doing?
We're doing well. What about you?
I'm pretty good.
Okay.
What I called to say to you is that you guys seem to have forgotten that when my brother Franklin Brand was the Speaker of the House of Assembly, he set about to set rules and regulation in place for the new government. The only party that attended discussion with Franklin Brand was the Stinkis Nevis Labour Party. As a result of that, my brother Franklin Brand resigned They say he could have stayed on and get at least 1 year to get a pension, to show this type of
1 month. He needed one. He resigned after 11 months. He needed one month more.
That's what I'm saying. I am saying to you that he did not even stay on long enough to get a pension. He would have been set for the rest of his life. That's the type of moral principle about Franklin Brand. He not only did that when he was in government in Nevis, he did the same thing when there was a problem down at Four Seasons. These are the type of people you need around government. Another thing is that when they told the Prime Minister, raise the matter with the Prime Minister tell them, look, none of you can hold a candle of correction to me. Because most of these guys have never been in government. And Tim allowed them to do what they wanted to do in the first term because he knew what he was up to at the end of the day. Because remember, basically, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And you cannot go around corners to deal with that. It's either one thing or the other. You can't come making noise for money. You're telling me you want your fair share. Fair share of what? You're forgetting that the Condolences movement is the one that has set up their own consolidated fund and destroy. May I also remind you that when the offshore companies were doing what they wanted to do in Nevis, those days we had what we call laundries in Nevis, and the federal government had to step in to do something about it. Remember that Nevis Island administration was the one that caused us to think it's Nevis to go on the black list. Lest you forget. Good night.
Don't go caller. When the dust has settled, where will it all end?
Where will it all end?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. Let me tell you something, right? The people of Sinkit are ready like Freddy. I don't know what Nevisions will do. I hope that they'll wake up and smell the coffee and fire all of them. Because they have not served us well. All they have talked about money and power. Our health system is in a deplorable condition. There is no integrity in public life act. No electoral reform. And these are some of the things that part of their cause serve. So tell me what else are they going to do? But go.
Thank you very much, caller. Now, Pat, I know you're very anxious to get into the cost of living here and inflation. We can always circle back to where we're heading in this political quagmire. Walking up through town past the D.R. Walwyn Plaza on Thursday of last week, there were two ladies in a very animated discussion. One lady said to the other, "Girl, when last you see the electricity bill, mine nearly double, you know." And I smiled because when the Wartsila engine was added at Prospect not so long ago, the Premier told us that would bring the cost of electricity down. Now, I couldn't, maybe I needed a sixth form student to try and walk me through that, but I couldn't figure it out. So that has gone through the roof. In fact, Nevlec brought out a memo which basically said, I didn't put on all, I only put on peace so long. So, electricity has gone through the roof. Gasoline, we know, has skyrocketed. Sometimes I have to go under the car to see if there's a hole in my gasoline tank. It just disappears. Barbados, for instance, did something from a government standpoint to make sure that the price of gasoline is stable. Here, whether it's bread or whatever, it's going up. And on the weekend, I'm sure you went to the supermarkets, whether it was Rams, Best Buy, Valuemart, there were a lot of empty shelves. As a matter of fact, one of the supermarkets put out a report that they'd had shipping issues. Now, one of the things that the Premier said during the pandemic is that he's been taught, one lesson he has learned is that we have to become more sustainable. At a time he should be coming to us and telling us how that sustainability will help us through this period. They're fighting for power. Caller said fighting for money, and nobody seems to be looking after the interests of the people of Nevis. I can't think of a single initiative that have been brought into play in 2022 to ease the cost of living and to bring inflation down. Have you seen it?
Well, I haven't seen it, Steve, and you have basically taken away all the talking points. But just to reiterate, though, in Nevis right now, people are complaining at the supermarket, they're complaining at the bakery, they're complaining at the gas station, they're complaining about Nevlec, complaining about water. The cost of living in Nevis has gone to the roof. Mind you, in times past, the things in Nevis have always been more expensive than in St. Kitts.
Mm-hmm.
And we have not really been examining these things closely enough and been reacting on a policy level to correct, these things. Because most of the inflation, and I think the IMF report spoke to that as well, most of the inflation that we experienced prior to now, this particular period, would have been inflicted on us in country. Because when goods reach at the border, it's not that it was that expensive to get them on the pier here, but to get them through customs, you have to go through paying custom service charge. You have to pay on some items, most items really, we have to pay the CET, and that is a tax that, for people who are not aware, is a tax that has been imposed on any good that is produced outside of CARICOM. So anything that is produced within CARICOM, if you get it from Trinidad, they wouldn't have on these high customs rate, these high tax rates. But once it is from outside, so even if we were to source something from let's say someplace in Brazil, cheap, by the time it gets here and they start putting on the CET, then the price is very high. Not only that, but the wages. Whenever you find in Nevis, wages would be higher and salaries higher than in St. Kitts. Right across the water, just 2 miles, same country. But wages over here are higher. The implication of that is, when the wages are higher, of course, if Ram's going to pay you more and you're in Nevis, it means that they're going to add that on to the cost of the goods. And that happens in almost every industry, because the cost of wages just a bit too high. Same thing in housing. To build a house in Nevis, the labor cost alone is much more compared to what's going on in St. Kitts. So most of our inflation in times past would have been self-inflicted, and we could do something about that. Government in this period of time can do something about that. The fact is now, though, most of the forces that are driving inflation are external forces, because we have supply chain issues that started since COVID, and now it has been compounded by what is going on with the war in Ukraine. And so it is not anything easy for us. You spoke about the Wärtsilä engine, and we've been talking about alternatives to that, but to no avail. The Nevis Island administration, led by the CCM, has just been spending monies like drunken soldiers or sailors. The sailors spend more than the soldiers, right?
Yeah, they do.
That's how they've been spending monies. Monies come in and they just spend. They just talk about sustainability as a catchword, because it is, I guess it is in thing, to do. But when we look at geothermal has surfaced in their manifesto before they got into government. Geothermal has surfaced in the Charleston Accord. But geothermal, for some reason, cannot find a foothold in their budget. So year after year, budgets are presented. And for 7 years now, and nothing meaningful has been put into securing for us alternative energy sources. So even though the IMF would tell us, and I think the last time I went here made the point, for a couple of the financial risks that we face, at least 4 of them out of 10, they would have said, accelerate your transition to local renewable energy sources. Why we cannot start to move in that direction so that we can secure a sustainable source of energy at a low cost for our people? Our people should not be crying out about Wärtsilä engine generated electricity to this day. So when the Premier had come on with his fancy talk and suggesting that to get a new engine would make costs go down, our issue is not necessarily the efficiency of the engine. Our issue is what goes into the engine. So for him to say that, one would think that you were going to put water in the engine or something, because the energy source was still fossil fuel. And when that goes up, and we do not produce any of that here, when that goes up incrementally, everything else has been going up to keep a pace. You know, they like to talk about a pace.
A pace, yeah.
So
Hospital
the only thing that is
pace,
moving at a pace right now, you know, is the cost of living, and I don't know, it's not at a pace that any of us can keep up with.
Now, the Prime Minister at his convention, the PLP convention, did a lovely song and a dance. I see money coming. Has all that been scuttled by all the shenanigans that's been going around? Because I personally have not heard him say anything since, and the people of St. Kitts Nevis were living in hope that they would get some ease. There would be some ease to the squeeze. But that seemed to have fallen on the sword, just as the CCM has.
Well, it was a good strategy, and I think it fit. It did fit in well with what he was trying to achieve, to energize his people, you know, and to grab some of the people from, you know, the various other the parties that were not doing anything or saying anything but cussing. And a lot of people would have been excited about that. But you see, the problem we have when you start increasing wages and salaries, for Nevis now, we go ball. We do not have the revenue to cover that. In our budget that was passed in December, we hardly had enough. We scaled back on everything. But to hear the Premier, and he knows he's not in a position to hear him suggest that he's going to take the freeze off of increments and salary increases should be someplace. That is why the crunch, that is why he felt it so much that he had to go back to ball shortly thereafter. Because it means if you're going to increase the salaries and the wages of government, and the revenue is not increasing, because, you know, things have been hard in Nevis. The economy has not been booming, and I don't think it has been growing as well as it has been in St. Kitts. And plus, they have the CBI at their discretion to use, it seems. You know, we don't have that. And we have not been looking for alternative sources of revenue, you know, for Nevis. So it means that whatever the wages and salaries bill of the NIA would have been, he was saying that if it cost $5,000 last year, it means that if he adjusts now for the increase that is anticipated, whether it's a 3% increase or whatever it is, he would not have enough money, because he has been saying that he has to be borrowing to pay civil servants. So that's why I think the appeal was made, well, putting aside the off the books kind of thing that I think might have been, you know, for the upcoming local elections, you know, that in itself is an issue. Because we have to be careful. You increase the salaries over here, if that seeps over to the private sector, salaries increasing, the same inflationary pressures are going to be put on us again, because commensurate with that is going to be an increase in consumer goods. Because RAM's not going to pay the people more money, or Valuemart or whomever, and not be able to recover that. So it means that things going to get worse. We need now to be looking at different policies to be able to bring the cost of living within, you know, a reasonable zone so that people could thrive. Because as it is now, with the wage bill going up, we're going to increase our national debt as well, because the Premier is going to be forced to borrow more money to pay for these things. And so I don't know that that is necessarily the best way for us to tackle the inflation. I think that there are other things that we should be able to do as it relates to the tax system. I spoke a while ago about, the regional taxation, because apparently we have harmonized with all the other Caribbean islands, or so whatever they claim is going to be the tax that is applied to any good that comes in from outside of the region. It means that we're going to have to ask for relief on that. Trinidad, I think, would have done that successfully in 2018 and 2019. And the thing is, compared to us, Trinidad produces more consumables than us, and when they started to feel the pinch, they made a representation to COTED, which is the Council for Economic and Trade and Economic Development within CARICOM. That's the branch in CARICOM, and they were able to get the CET waived so that things coming into Trinidad could be cheaper for their people. Right now, as it stands, I think we have a CET. I think someone said it ranges from as low as 6% to as high as 53.2%. Imagine you order something from Amazon and it costs you $10, and by the time it gets here, it costs you more than the $10 that you paid, because that is just in tax. Because right now, because of the increase in fuel prices, obviously freight has gone up. So when the freight is added to the value of what you bring in, they tax you on that. So it's not even to say, well, let us keep stable, whatever the freight, let us be, drop something off. They're still taxing us now, the same way they did last year, when things were, when freight was cheaper. So right now, it doesn't make any sense for you to order anything that is expensive from overseas. Maybe if you can order your masks and those little things.
Things like that.
Yeah, because it's unbearable. I imported something and had this experience that I couldn't believe it. I had to pay. I was trying to get some roller skates for some kids, and for one pair of roller skate that cost me less than $60 US, I had to pay $200 and something to get it cleared. That included the freight and the taxes. And so we have to look at that source of the taxation on the people in order to give us some relief. Mind you, I know government, that is how they survive, by taxation.
Tax and spend.
But that is just it. You have to be mindful about how you spend. You can't be continuing to spend the same way you did when things were better. Things are bad now, and you need to be mindful about how you spend. And that is the issue. I don't think we have that kind of mature,
forward thinking,
right? And responsible, exercise of financial discretion. People just get their hands on money and they just spend it because it's not theirs.
15 minutes to the hour. That's all the time we've got. We'll take a break and then we'll be right back.
But the economy is broken, the government stick. Can the opposition come and take a seat? The debt is high and employment's low, and it's the poor people who taking the blow. I say we tired, we need a revolution. We just can't depend on vaccination. I say we tired, time to pick we self off the floor. Just remember, people matter more. So when you hear them talking bull on the radio, people used to matter more. Whether you red, blue, orange or yellow, people used to matter more. But when they needed us for last election, we were always there for option. But now they in and they comfortable. People don't matter no more. Whoa, some people may not like this, but people used to matter more. RCC and them made a slogan out of it. People used to matter more.
And we're back. We're on the home stretch. 14 minutes to go to 10 o'clock. Now, before the break, you spoke about fiscal prudence. And on every program, in every press conference, the Premier says that people ask him about how the money is spent on Nevis. He said the argument or the question that should be asked is how they're spending it in St. Kitts. Now, we all want fair share, but everybody knows that all politics is local. Why is the Premier so afraid? And if he's afraid, he'd better get used to it, because we're going to be talking a lot about accountability going forward to the next election. But why is it he's so fearful of accounting for the resources, whatever it is that comes to Nevis?
Because they really can't account for it. And that is just the issue. The checks and balances that ought to go with government business, not in place. When you hear the stories on the road, they raise your head, Steve.
Well, I hear them.
The kind of things that are going on, and the Premier can't say he doesn't know about them.
But he says this. I've heard him one evening on with the Minister of Housing, Alexis Jeffers. And he said, Alexis, when last you hear anybody talk about corruption with the Housing and Land Development Corporation? So one thing he's happy for is that his government has been without scandal. Obviously, he hasn't got his ears on the ground.
That is not obvious at all. Obviously, he is himself. That is the kind of language that he would use. He's the same person who went on an international media program and said, to the extent that people who are offering people money for bribes and all that, for election bribes. So you can't take anything he says. You know,
so you think there'll still be money in T-shirts down the road?
But on a serious note, there's lack of accountability. And like I said, I always reference IMF report because I like independent people. I like to read reports from independent people. I don't like necessarily to confine my views to just what I hear locally. But he must be aware of what is going on. And he's pretending as if he does not know about what is going on in land and housing. Because that is one of the areas that we have, monies have been, this is not for formal conversation. The kind of things that are being said on the road.
I hear them.
And from people who are credible people. People who are placed in positions who see things but are afraid to say anything. But the day that they leave office and we have an audit of what would have happened, and I think that is why they don't want anybody else close to government. Because even though they can't manage, they're going to do all that they can
to damage.
There you go. And to avoid the day of accountability. But there must come a day, Steve. There must be a day of accountability. Because you can't tell me that from 2017, when this Premier took over, to this point, having expended over $1.1 billion of people money, divisions money, and we can hardly see on the ground anything that was achieved. When we look at the government services that are being offered to the people of Nevis, I said, these people, they don't have any conscience. You got the hospital, you should be able to you shouldn't have to, every time someone gets sick, they have to be going around with a card, a sponsor card, and begging money. Steve, what is going on is not right. It is deplorable. And I don't know, with a straight face and a clean conscience, if the Premier would say that, because he knows that what is going on is not right. Nivision should be able to see more on the ground based on the monies that have passed through these guys. And you're talking about big monies. It shouldn't just be reflected in their lifestyle. It should be reflected in the lifestyle of the ordinary Nivision. Ordinary Nivision shouldn't have to go to bed hungry. I've been getting some kind of requests from people and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Sometimes this story is almost as if it's the same story I heard yesterday. People are hurting. People are giving you stories about being behind, being delinquent in, certain, financial commitments that they might have made. And the court is, behind people because you're not getting any break. Once judgment is passed against you in the court, that is collection time. Wherever you find it, you're going to have to get it. Those kind of things, there's no relief for those kind of people. But get back to the accountability issue. There's just too much wastage. There's just too much that is going on that is, I think, is illegal. It is illegal what has been going on, and particularly in those ministries that involve building anything, you know, and the kind of stories that you hear about who has to, you know, inflate their invoices and then to whom they have to pay. Those kind of things should not be happening in an environment where nothing is going on. Economic activity is so low in Nevis and everybody is balling. And so the day of accountability
will come.
And I'm hoping that it will come in short order, because we need for the Premier to be able to account for all those monies that have been spent. Those that are on the books and those that are not on the books. We need an audit. And I think that that is one of the deficiencies that would have been pointed out in the IMF report as it relates to accountability. And it is out there, you know, in the public domain, it is out there. And so instead of trying to tighten up things and spend less, you know, and do as the IMF would have suggested, rationalize your spending, they've made the observation that there are projects that are not ready yet, that are just, you know, there's no plan, but projects are just being pushed through. Monies are being wasted because they're not properly planned. And that ought to stop. You know, we ought to have a development plan for Nevis. You know, we can't just go through just every day doing things just arbitrarily. And that is one of the things that I think needs to come to a stop. And the fleecing of Nevis ought to be done away with. And Nevisians are going to get the opportunity to do just that, to hold people accountable. And they need not to fall for the fancy talk, because we now know when you listen long enough, a lot of it is falsehood. No matter how nicely it is packaged, no matter how much of the Queen English, you know, you use, a lot of it, Nevisians are for sensible. And I'm not going to apologize for that. The 98% of us, we know better. And we ought to be able to do better and stop falling for personalities and likability and them foolishness there. Because at the end of the day, Nevis is not moving forward. We have lost ground, and it's time for us to correct that. We need to be able to mobilize revenues from other sources other than just the CBI, because what essentially the current NIA has become is a beg and borrow administration. You beg the PM to increase whatever it is, and the shortfall from that, you go and you borrow it someplace. And so Nevis is forever in debt. It doesn't seem as if there's any light at the tunnel as it relates to how indebted we have become, because there seems to be an attitude that it is not my money, I would not be responsible for it when I leave. You know, Nevisians would have to deal with that. So right now, each Nevision owing over $40,000, each Nevision owes in national debt of Nevis, whether you just born 2 minutes ago or
you ain't born yet.
There you go, because the unborn is going to have to end up paying for it, and that cannot be fair, and that is not a sustainable way of growing a country. And the Premier ought to have a conscience, recognizing that he has failed at his portfolio as the Premier of Nevis to advance the economic condition of the people of Nevis. We are not better off. He had asked the question. He had put the question to people before. Considered the dilemma that you're in. Ask yourself, are you any better off? So after 7 years of mismanagement, are you any better off? You still go over the taxi, the only payer, and you're still giving $5 to the window, not even seeing because it is dark. You're not even seeing who you're giving it to, and still not getting a receipt. You know, that is the level that we're talking about, people not being accountable. Now, how could you run a system like that? I'm not trying to accuse anybody over there, mind you. I'm just saying that we are creating the atmosphere that allows people who salaries can't make can't make the bills. And we're hearing about it, even in the civil service, at, you know, some levels that you would imagine it shouldn't happen. We're hearing about people who are taking up what they didn't put down. hearing about people who are stealing just to survive. People should not be reduced to that, because I think that Nivisions used to be a prideful people. We were very proud, and we never used to steal and those kind of things. But for survival, it seems people are going that route, and it is unfortunate that we have gotten to this point. And I think it is about time that we reconsider our allegiances, because I don't understand why people just get, devote themselves to a party, a primary color, a blue or a green. You just devote yourself to it, and irrespective of how they mismanage, you still stick with them. Now, if you're amongst the 98%, I'm appealing to you tonight to look at what is going on. Consider the question that the Premier would have posed years ago when he was in opposition. Are you any better off? I'm not even going to ask you to compare your standard of living to his, because there's no comparison there. I'm just going to ask you if your condition is any better now than it was in 2017 when you gave him your trust and you asked him, please, to make things better for you.
We've got 4 minutes. That's all the time we've got. So the mortal remains of the late Premier will lay in state in Thursday and Friday, and then of course he will go back to his old stomping ground at the E.T. Willett Park for the final service, the homegoing service, and then of course going up to his beloved St. George's Anglican Church for his interment. Are you expecting any more civility from our leadership in the remaining days of mourning? And final question, you've got 3 minutes to answer both. Where will this end? The drama that has been unfolding in St. Kitts and Nevis, orchestrated in great part by our dear leader, the Premier of Nevis. He certainly hasn't brought peace and progress and prosperity to our island. Seems that wherever he goes, there will be all sorts of political antics.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because by now, and I keep asking the question, are there not any adults in the room? It seems to me that the Prime Minister, by default, has been the only one, who seemed to have been adult. He has asked for quiet. He has asked them, to at least respect the period of mourning, and so they've not really heeded that. For their own, I don't understand who is advising these guys, but I think that the advisors need to be, terminated. They have not conducted themselves, favorably in the eyes of many up to this point, and so I really am not very optimistic that the next couple of days would be any more civil than it would have been for the past 10 days. And so I tomorrow morning when I wake up, the thing is, every morning you wake up in anticipation that something
more drama
there would be more drama, because we just have some guys who have just not been operating at the level that one would have expected, that goes with the office that they have been, and the portfolios that have been assigned to them. And one would have thought that they could conduct themselves in a more decent manner, man. It is annoying. It is disappointing, but I just hope that somebody at home, maybe somebody at home, maybe not at the office, maybe somebody at home could calm down these guys, and so the next couple of days we might be able to, have a smooth transition, from where we were to where we have to go. If the motion has been if you can do it decently and in order, take it to the House where it deserves to be taken. Let us settle it there. You have the 21 days, which you must bring it, because at least that is something that they can be proud of, that they did bring to the House finally. The law that means that the motion of no confidence must be tabled within 21 days. And so we're hoping that they would be mindful of that. Let it run its course. The Prime Minister going to take his 90 days, and then we'll have the general election, and let's hope, for the sake of Nivisions, that at least they are nowhere close to government after that.
Premier Brantley, you've got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Please do this one, at least the next 4 days, for Vance. Good night. You've been listening to Your Voice with the NRP with Dr. Patricia Bartlett. Join us next week.
your voice, your voice, your voice with the NRP. This and every Monday, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Join host Stephen Semanas and the NRP candidates as they amplify your voice.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Nevis Broadcast.